that even amongst the trad cats, there's a bunch of gay dudes. It's a lot of gay shit still. So just because they're trad, don't fall for the idea. For example, one of the famous, this is one of them, Father Arnaud Rostand, a very prominent SSPX priest from 2008 to 2014 district superior, admitted to decades of underage stuff. In the 2020, there was a Kansas Bureau of Investigation into SSPX abuse, skittles, butt stuff. So this led eventually to an entire organization where people set up a thing for survivors of the SSPX. There's also a side chain, which gets into the history of the SSPX, also having connections to high-level corporate figures, very prominent sort of financiers in the world of France. That's kind of a shady, sort of unclear thing. I'm sure that there are espionage, intelligence connections involved with the SSPX, but that's a little bit murkier and it's kind of hard to figure out. I do recall reading, though, that some of the chief members of the SSPX, in terms of lay influence, they were like these high-level CEO corporate figures, which, I mean, yeah, technically it's not necessarily bad to have money, but and be involved at a lay level with this sort of a thing, but it does make one wonder that, why are the people running the SSPX seemingly kind of like weird French corporate dudes? And a lot of this domain overlaps with, as we said, kind of covert tiny mustache man support amongst French far right. And the French far right is its own whole bag of weirdness and scandals. And some of you might be thinking, whoa, beige, dude. The problem is that although it may sound beige in terms of ideology, just like America's sort of, quote, far right, when you get into the Odinists and the people who LARP as tiny mustache man devotees, it turns into an alternate weird butt touching stuff. It just always does. I don't know why. I don't know why the so-called far right, whatever that even means, why they always end up being involved in some kind of weird butt stuff. So, no, you're not going to find, I can tell you from experience. Now, I never had my butt touched. Father Gregory Post didn't ever touch my butt. But he did like to bring out his Tiny Mustache Man World War II memorabilia collection, which he thought was almost a sort of semi-sacramental thing for him. He was a weirdo, man. He was an odd weirdo. But to get back to the SSPX, so my experience was beginning to go to the Latin Mass in, I would say, 2003. And I met several SSPX people over the years and priests. Not a whole lot. I would say maybe 4 or 5 priests. There was going to be a time where I was going to meet, I think, Bishop Fillet, who's one of the more prominent old school SSPX bishops, but for whatever reason that ended up never happening. He didn't end up coming to the parish. I will say that, my experience in the SSPX wasn't all bad. They never treated me as if it was a sort of a cult thing, although eventually, as I got more and more Seda in my opinions, I was eventually asked to leave the SSPX, and Father Gregory Post threatened if I ever set foot on an SSPX chapel grounds again, he would have me arrested. Which is funny because the dispute between Father Gregory Post and I at this time was over the question of whether John Paul II would eventually be canonized. I argued that the Vatican II Church would have to canonize him because it would solidify the entirety of Vatican II to make one of the key architects of the implementation of Vatican II, right? Obviously, John Paul II didn't do Vatican II. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that to take it to the next phase, I was like, of course they're going to canonize him. They're going to canonize, just like they canonized Mother Teresa. And Father Gregory Post said this would be impossible because for him, he said, the magisterium can't err. And, canonizations are clearly part of the magisterium. If they weren't, then you could then doubt and question every saint in the history of the church, which would undo the entire religion. So clearly canonizations have to be part of the magisterium, he argued. But that would also mean that Vatican II is part of the magisterium. So this is a double-edged sword for the SSPX schismatic position. I was right. They did absolutely canonize John Paul II. Father Gregory Post was 100% wrong. But this was around the time that I began to question just the entire Vatican structure, right? I started thinking maybe something is off with just Vatican II Catholicism, or perhaps the papist position in general. And I was a very hardcore trad cat, very devoted to it. I would have had a lot of the same attitudes and positions of, a lot of your trad cats that you see out here today. I used to read everything from Sedevacantis stuff to, Michael Matt and the Remnant and Michael Davies. I read the whole sort of spectrum of it. And just to show you that this isn't bull crap, I thought it'd be funny to go through a few of my old sort of SSPX era materials. One that I forgot I had, which is pretty wild, was, and I got this at the SSPX chapel when I was a devotee. You can see here, I always write the date of when I got the book. So here is me at the SSPX chapel dating at 2024. And this one is a book about the kingship of Christ and the conversion of the Jews. And one of the things that the SSPX introduced me to was pretty significant critiques of Americanism. I wasn't really ready for that when I was kind of still in my, Ron Paul libertarianist phase, but I was beginning to move in that direction. And so I remember the first significant critique that I read, which is still a very, I would say, a really good book on the topic. It's very rare. You can't really find it. There's this oddball woman named Solange Hertz, and I believe she was SSPX. But her you could find her books at the SSPX, but she wrote a book called Star Spangled Heresy. And this was one of the first books that really kind of made me question the whole idea of Republican democracy. Let's see when I got this one. So I bought this and read this in 2005. So there you can see I would sign my books when I got the book. So this one was 2005. I'm saying this to show you guys that, like, I'm not new to this stuff. Like, I've been reading these books and involved in these worlds for back to the early 2000s. I mean, I was already grappling with the papacy, tradcat stuff. I mean, right after the Big 9 event. And a lot of people were saying, man, Jay was dealing with this back when I was in my freaking diapers. Yeah, so maybe I know a little bit about this. Maybe you shouldn't just assume that because I'm confident and speak in a masculine way that he's mean. He's mean. I don't have to listen to because he's mean. The next book that really impressed me, I guess, from that vantage point of sort of applying religion to the political sphere, and I was also amenable to this because as a Calvinist, I was a Reconstructionist, right? Reconstructionists believe in a Christian state and the idea that the state also has a duty to God. They can't be neutral or whatever. The SSPX would put out a book by Father Stephen DeLallo. And if you don't know, the SSPX's publishing house is called Angelus Press. And so I would read Angelus Press books all the time. And this one is about the implications of Christ the King. For those that don't know, there was a questioning of the relationship of the Vatican and Christianity to the state all the way back to the French Revolution. And so if you're a trad cat, you believe that it's absolutely necessary to fight for the social dominance of Christianity, aka Catholicism or papism, through social kingship of Christ and the idea of the feast of Christ the King, which is Pius XI's encyclical that he wrote to promote the social dominance of Catholicism. Of course, Vatican II undid all that, and we've seen the ramifications in the Western Catholic world of the de-Catholicizing and the de-Christianizing of the state, whether it's Spain or whether it's any of the France, any of the countries in Europe, they've all undergone this quote de-Christianization that Vatican II then turns around and supports through documents like Gaudium et Spes, which are essentially Fabian socialist documents calling for de-armament, calling for open borders, calling for essentially the end of the Christian state, religious liberty, right of private interpretation. All these Reformation era heresies are all throughout the documents of Vatican II, but everyone overlooks Gaudium et Spes because they're always focused on Lumen Gentium and Nostra Aetate, which are absolutely the worst, but there is just as much error in the political severance of Christianity from the state as there is the soteriological doctrines of Vatican II. So I read Sword of Christendom. I found that to be very convincing in terms of critiques of republicanism, democracy, the Enlightenment ethos of the United States of America, the deists, the Freemasons. I've been questioning America and Americanism and classical liberalism since 2002, 3, 4. So I'm not new to this. More particularly with the theology, I remember, and I still have some of my old SS. I have a prayer for the canonization of Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre from my time at the SSPX chapel. That's probably 22 years old. This little prayer for the canonization. And the removal of that, it's a prayer for his removal of excommunication and canonization. Yeah, good luck with that. That's never going to happen. But the SSPX, for example, put out little books like "Is Tradition Excommunicated?" And I was pretty enamored with that one.